This is a conversation that we've all been looking forward to. This is traditional knowledge and how Indigenous people are viewing and dealing with climate change, as well as solutions that they have towards this challenge that the rest of us can really learn a great deal from. Our host for this panel is Duncan Campbell, who has the Living Dialogues, which is a radio program in Boulder, Colorado. Please welcome Duncan.
Thank you very much, Sally. Today we're going to follow in the spirit of the ceremonial opening from this morning, which was led by Kalani Souza. And we're going to have a conversation in circle, if you will. This flat semicircle represents our part of it, and it extends out into the imaginary circle with all of you in council with us on this topic of traditional wisdom, Indigenous responses to climate change. And the first thing we can say is that we're all Indigenous. We're Indigenous to the planet, and in my view, as I have presented on my program Living Dialogues for 20 years, we all have, as our human species birthright, a sense of belonging in a fully alive universe, in a fully alive cosmos, where the stars are alive, the land is alive with consciousness, the song lines, the plants and the plant spirits are alive and in communication with us, and the animals, the animal totems are alive and partake in consciousness. And this was what the anthropologists call, in their fancy way, participation mystique. Like mystical participation is actually our birthright. And what we're involved in now, from my view and my life story on Living Dialogues, is a particular part of the human species development where we move from our indigenosity and, in a sense, move from that original being with phase into what is often now called the modern mind, or even the postmodern mind. But it's marked by a sense of separation from an inert natural cosmos and an arrogance of arrogating to ourselves and perhaps to the human brain itself as the only repository of consciousness, much less wisdom. And it's not unlike an adolescent. We're all familiar with this, pushing Father Sun and Mother Sky, or excuse me, Father Sun and Mother Earth away, as an adolescent does, as a necessary part of individuation and self-empowerment. And then at a certain point, as Mark Twain said, when I was 14, I was just really struck with how ignorant my parents were. And at the age of 21, I was amazed at how much they'd learned in 7 short years. And so we're actually in that phase of human development where our techne, which is the Greek word for human-made tools, has been used to empower ourselves over and against the uncertainties and unpredictable extreme weather of climate change and of the natural world. And our technology has actually outstripped our psychological and spiritual maturity. And so at this stage, what I was shown over 20 years ago is called for is a reactivation of our psychic and physical indigenous DNA, which we all have. It's not something foreign to us, but it's been in remission for many of us because of our lifestyle for the last several hundred years. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this dialogue rather than a panel of experts or a panel of just delivering information. So in honoring that, I want to begin by calling on Roland McCook, who is our elder from this actual land for many generations. So we'll begin with Roland, and then we'll go to Osprey Oriole Lake. Well, actually, she's sitting in the place of honor here as the feminine, but in sequence, we'll then go to Kalani Souza, and then to Bob Goff, and then to Osprey Oriole Lake, and then we'll all enter into a larger dialogue. So with that sort of sense of setting the energy field, the last thing I want to say is that what I've learned for decades of doing this is that your attentive, open, deep listening and a sense of being an active participant through your deep listening will evoke spontaneously a depth in this jointly created dialogue. So with that introduction, I'm going to introduce Roland McCook, who will honor us with his presence and permission to have this dialogue on his native land. Roland.
Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having me here. My name is Roland McCook. I am an Uncompahgre Ute, a member of the Northern Ute from Utah. I was born and raised on the Uinta and AREI Reservation. But I want to express to you how we feel about where we're going with the environment. What I said was, you know, my people lived in these mountains following the herds that they had, and that they respected everything that is. It came from the heart. We always talk from the heart when we talk about the environment and in its totality. You know, our language, I speak fluent Ute, has always been misunderstood at some times. Right from the start, 1400, when Columbus came here, you know, when they saw the boats, the people on the shore, Columbus waved at them like this, and the Indians was going like this. Right from the start, we couldn't understand each other. It was even the first sign language, and that continued across the country. So, but very seriously, the environment that we live in, my people were indigenous to the Rocky Mountains. Sometimes I refer to it as our people's Walmart. We got our food, clothing, medicine, the whole works was located right here in the Rocky Mountains. This is where my people came from. They hunted on this land. They buried their dead in this land. The women giggled during the good times and cried during the bad times. All of those ingredients that make me who I am and pass down to me as a Nooch. I'm a Nooch. And those are the people that lived here for hundreds of years. And then all of a sudden, we were in the way because there were encroachment settlers that wanted to take that land from us so that they could profit from that land. A totally different idea than what we had. Ours was just to live in harmony with the resources, because one man could not take more than he needed. There's just no way he could do that. And it became almost religious not to gouge into Mother Earth. So you see, when in 1881, September 1st, my people were removed from Colorado to Utah so that we could make room for those people that wanted to come and utilize the resources in your way, foreign to us. So we were removed to Utah, onto a reservation where the resources just weren't there. So the government had control of us. And we abandoned the traditional medicinals, the traditional berries, the traditional ways that we had previous. And so, but we adapted to that. And we are now still living there. And where we take issue with the surrounding that Mother Earth is going through is all of the developments that are taking place without any idea what they're doing to the adjacent lands or to the earth itself and the air. And we sit back because now we've become standbys. We've become observers because the dominant society is doing all of this to Mother Nature. And when we start to talk about Mother Nature, we sit there and we watch on the news media what is happening around the earth. Is Mother Earth getting angry? Is Mother Earth taking it into her own hands and saying, you know what, I've had it, it's enough, I'm going to do what I want. But see, the dominant society applies science to Mother Nature's. You give it a name, you label it, we sit back as Indigenous people and say, leave it alone. It's going to happen anyway. So manipulating the weathers, your science, salting the clouds, making snow, all of these things that aren't natural, we sit there and watch from our vantage point. On our reservation, we observe Mother Nature and the preservation of those resources to the point where we don't allow four-wheelers on our reservation. We're not allowed to go off the roads that are already there. And so in a way, we're preserving our natural resources and the wildernesses. Someday we think that maybe the Indian reservations will be the only pristine lands left if we keep pushing federal governments to develop and reach beyond what is reasonable. But you know, I was with the federal government for 28 years, and then I began to do something different, and I wanted to do something that I could make tangible evidence that I had contributed something. First of all, I wanted to go to the tribal government so that we could instill into the developments that were happening on the reservation to give it an environmental concerns that were different than the federal government's. But do you know what? Our words are not carried by the Bureau of Indian Affairs because they have their own agenda. So you see, we have a clash of ideas where we want to preserve and they want to develop. And so we're kind of like caught in a way that is uncomfortable for us. But then I felt like that I had done my part. So then I wanted to do more. I thought I needed to dig into what our tribe was all about. Why are we here? Where are we going? And how are we going to do these things if we're going to make an impact on the environment in a different and positive way? And so I've been thinking that perhaps the indigenous tribes need to gather together because, like I said, we are on reservations that perhaps are pristine and come up with these programs that we can preserve beyond what is going on today. The other thing that I did, just to give myself a broader knowledge, is that I put in to be to the Smithsonian Institute for the Repatriation Review Committee, and I became the chairman of that committee, and that is to address the darkest part of our history, where the Army actually confiscated and collected Native American remains off the battlefield so that they could study them. I became part of that, and that gave me the knowledge that, you know, things are ruthless out there, not only to indigenous people, but to Mother Nature, to our environment. And so how do we curb this thing? And so, and this was illustrated to me again when I retired. I retired to Montrose, Colorado. I've been there 6 years. In my reservation, I can ride up to the Book Cliffs, and there's not a track off of the main road, as I said, and it's pretty pristine. Fishing, hunting, all of that. I enjoy that. But when I retired, I came to Montrose, Colorado, just because it was in the middle of my people's lands. And upon finding out where my people may have had their travels up over the ridges and what ridges they may have followed, I began to look at the land itself. I was very mostly disturbed by what I saw. Was all the oil or the tills, the gold and silver mining evidence all along the pristine mountains just did not sit right with me. And there needs to be something that I know we're past all of that, because to rehab them would have taken place many years ago, and they're still there. these magnificent mountains that we have are scarred by those tailings piled up along the roadsides. You can see them all across. And I don't know what has to be done to do that, but on a bigger scale, what we have to look at is all of the countries that are polluting, all of the countries, China, all of those that have no regard that we have, the values that we have in the United States, which I think is great. We do our part. But the other countries have to join in and have to make that happen. I think that's really lacking because if things keep going, the airborne particulates that come into our area is going to get to the point where we just will have to deal with it some way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roland. And at this point, we're going to introduce a little technology into the mix, as I believe, with Kalani Souza.
I had been talking to them this morning. Our protocols demand that we dress first someone whose ancestors' bones reside within the ground where we are. As Polynesians, we're not allowed to speak. And I told you, I was very uncomfortable this morning speaking to you because I had not been given access to do that. And I could feel my grandfather pushing on me saying, don't say anything, boy. You have no permission here, And so, my brother, what a pleasure to meet you and see here. And I ask your permission to speak in this place of your ancestors, in this place of your people.
Thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you, my brother. And I know for others it seems like a perfunctory thing, but for us it's a deeply emotional thing. I don't have the right to speak here until I get permission from someone whose ancestors are part of this land. This is not just done here. As Bob has been traveling with us for the last 5 years, we do this everywhere we go. We're not allowed to speak until we address them. This is protocol. It's respect. These customs have been around for 10,000 years. You know what I mean? And we know them. And we're a little bit anguished at the lack of respect that we see, in the world. So, and no harm, no foul to everyone here. I just wanted to let you know why I was a little put off this morning. And I feel a lot better having Roland present in the room and being, my grandfather feels better. I can tell right here. So mahalo. And
We have the empty chair right here.
thank you. And we always have the empty chair, the noho pani haka haka. We always make sure that the chair is present to remind us of those that should be with us in the room and are unable to be here. And the generations that have gone on before that are represented by the noho. And the generations yet to be born that are coming into the room. And so when we speak, we should speak with their presence in mind. And again, this is not something we do lightly. This is something we do everywhere we go. It's necessary for me to be able to look my mother in the eye when I returned to Hawaii and said things were done in a right way. And that is of huge importance to every indigenous tribe I've ever met. So I'm going to break with my tradition and actually do a PowerPoint. and Bob knows, it's like, I notoriously do not like PowerPoints, don't like people who show up with PowerPoints. I'm like, why use PowerPoint to set the context? We are the context, So this is just because I need to get information out quickly. So you'll please forgive me as I blaze through this, because we wanted to show you that using indigenous knowledge and using our relationships at home, that we're solution building for adaptation. So it's not just waha, We're not just talking about it. I do work at 100,000 feet in policy, but I also work at 10 feet with community. Because if it ain't down there on the ground, it ain't for real. That's just how it is. So our mission is to help the indigenous island economies help themselves by adapting scientific, technical, blah, blah, blah. You can read that. University of Hawaii, we're out there jamming. So our focus, though, is relationships, culture, community, capacity, respect, and aloha, love and compassion. beyond anything. That's what we live. Aloha, brother. Aloha, Mike. You know what I mean? To know that we are one. These are our clients. You know, in Polynesian tradition, the water, the fishing is the domain of the men because they go over the horizon, just like the hunting. And the women tend the agriculture and the plants. And so we work with the women's groups throughout the islands. This is a group that I'm working with in Palau. You can see the ukulele goes with me everywhere. It's a bad habit. Talking to a young Samoan leader in the field. This is my partner, Craig Elovich, who's one of the most published authors on agroforestry and diversified food forests. And he and I are both working with Cornell to develop a new kind of agricultural process where we do 4-dimensional farming. So the 3 dimensions of the canopy, the substory, you know, and the ground crops and the root crops that are in the ground also, growing together. This kind of agriculture requires this kind of expertise. Now, these people are identified as climate migrants or refugees. And when they come to the state of Hawaii, because we've been absorbing them from Micronesia and Melanesia as their islands go underwater, they're relegated to jobs in Apcoa parking lot, you know, and the janitor at the Hilton. You know, when really they are skilled, highly skilled in agroforestry. They know more about agroforestry than I can teach any student at Cornell about. You know what I mean? And they're able, so we should be treating them as specialized laborers and paying them a salary that commiserates with the expertise that they have. And this is when they start learning. They're like this age and they're learning and doing it. And it's the gift of the breadfruit plant. Now, you guys all know Fletcher Christian, right? The whole thing was over breadfruit. The reason it was over breadfruit is breadfruit only grows from a rhizome, a shoot. So the British crew had to stay in Tahiti for a year in order to get those 5,000 plants. Well, in a year, there was a lot of, you know, bumping in the night, and the next thing you know, there's kids, and nobody wants to leave the family, right? And here's the English crown going, get on the ships, it's time for us to go. And the brothers were like, no. You know what I mean? So we were like totally with the guys on the bounty. We're like, no, you know, why that gotta happen? You know, just because you want to feed the slaves in the Caribbean, give me a break, you know? So breadfruit is gluten-free. So it can become the next gluten-free staple of the world and really be a counterpoint to wheat. You know, and those of you who are familiar with the dietary diseases that are occurring at an epidemic rate in this country, you understand what I'm talking about. So research and science, we've been working with the Breadfruit Institute. The early projections of gluten-free flour as an economic driver, we were 1.54 billion, you know, estimated to 3.3 billion. These were our first projections when we did this like 4 years ago. We were so wrong. So it turns out that as we're looking at it, this is the projected rate of growth. So we're talking serious economic development happening at community levels, run by women in microeconomics. You following me? Yeah. Okay, so here's the team. The Breadfruit Research Team, we're working with a lot of different people, predominantly Diane Ragone, who's one of my heroes, and Susan Murch. Diane sacrificed 30 years of her life to collect every variety of breadfruit from around the world. She brought it to Hana, Maui, kind of my hometown, and we started setting them into place. She has dedicated her life to this mission, and this woman, unbelievable. What they've done with Susan Murch is they've developed a propagation method through plant protocols and cloning that enable us to, well, in the last 3 years, we put 35,000 breadfruit trees out into the world, in Africa, in Haiti, and you know, we're really jumping out there and enabling people to feed themselves. Alvin Huang, who's a good friend of mine, created NutraSweet. Right. And I said, Alvin, you owe me. You know what I mean? You unleash this demon into the world. Get over here and work for free. You know what I mean? It's like, so he's like, you're right. I feel so bad. I was 27. I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I said, no 27-year-old actually knows what they're doing. You know what I mean? So Alvin is actually working with us through the university. He's a fabulous food scientist. And what we're trying to do is make the breadfruit flour, which exists now, indistinguishable from enriched wheat flour. We make the impact when a cook in a restaurant or a bakery or a housewife can use it just like they're used to using it. Get the same rise, get the same product development. Also on the team is Jeff Gwertz. He's the #1 miller in the world. Kansas University. He's been with us for 2 years now, jumping in. These guys are vying because anybody, nobody, we do to do. Sam Choi, Omalu, you know, these guys have all jumped on board to help with the marketing campaign to push this out, you know, and Troy keeps saying, and the breadfruit is so good for my hair. And you're like, what's up with that? You know, but it's no good without a distributor. So we aligned ourselves with C.H. Robinson, who is one of the largest food distributors in the world, and they're really looking forward to it. Their big customer is Subway, so they're really looking forward to having a gluten-free bread roll that they can bake and offer on their health sandwiches and stuff. And I'm just thinking we actually have to have this kind of capacity if we're going to drive forward with this economic development. Now, the breadfruit supplies are hitting the market. Craig and myself take them out. We teach farmers. I teach agroforestry and permaculture between everything else. And, you know, I go to Palau and Chuk. And what we did was, see that Pacific region? C.H. Robinson says to us, we need 150,000 tons a week. Can you deliver that? And I was like, no, but we can. Right? So then the trick was, how do we get all these governments to agree to do this? So it took us about 2 years, but we jumped out. And the Micronesian governments, those are the leaders of all the Micronesian governance systems from Palau, Yap, Chuk, CNMI, Ponape. They've all agreed to get behind this initiative. Now, why was that important? We cannot do an energy conversion. Each one of these islands spend $2 million a month on diesel fuel to run their electricity since World War II. So it's a nice cash cow, you know what I mean, for the petrol companies. Every one of them. And they don't have the money to convert. Beyond that, the oil delivery subsidizes the food delivery of goods to the islands. So we cannot entertain the idea of an energy transfer unless we accommodate the food that's needed on the ground. So the idea of this agroforest, where the breadfruit is the spine of the forest, but we're growing bananas, yucca, papayas, sweet potato, coffee, everything else is growing inside this food forest. What that means is, unlike the monocropping orchards, you cannot mechanize harvest. Harvest has to be done by humans, deeply in relationship with the forest. Walking through, picking a fruit only when it's ripe, only when it's ready. So the breadfruit is seen as the exportable good, and all the other foods are seen as the foods that feed the farmers markets and the families and the people on the ground. So we're not going to do just palm oil or pineapples or macadamia nuts. You know, oh great, now we all get macadamia nuts to eat. You know, by the way, pineapples, not from Hawaii. Macadamia nuts, not from Hawaii. You know, even passion fruit, not from Hawaii. You know, all these things people think are from Hawaii. Coffee, not from Hawaii. You know, right, not from Hawaii. This is an invasive species, right? It's like, we eat poha berries. Oh, you never heard of a poha berry, right? But we make jams and jellies out of that. We got all kinds of foods that have been completely ignored as these big machineries of agricultural commerce have come in. By the way, here's a little note. Monsanto has been the funder of the University of Hawaii since 1959. Right. So, you know, the agricultural teaching at the university, one of the reasons I left, is run completely by Syngenta, Monsanto, and Pioneer Seed. So, there are 4 of us. Craig down in Melanesia, Doc Tusi, a great Samoan leader in the Polynesian area. I'm handling Hawaii, and the upper Micronesia is being handled by CL. That's me. These are all the agencies that I work with in my stupid little titles. I don't care about. I'm really more important. I feel good because my mom thinks I'm doing good stuff. You know what I mean? When I go home, if my mom says I did something good, then it works for me. I don't actually care about the other stuff. Craig Elovich, genius guy. When we're traveling in the South Pacific, I tell everybody he's Steve Jobs. He just faked his death and he's with me out there doing good work now. C.L. Cheshire, brilliant, brilliant economist. I'm teaching him a little bit more about social interaction. And so, you know, he's learning to drink with the best of them and hang out. And, you know, and really, it's quite an education. I mean, he's won unbelievable economic awards. Doc Tusi, who's just a genius. And third from the king, has been offered the kingship twice and turned it down. How many of you would turn down being king? You know what I mean? Because it's good to be the king. You know what I mean? So these additional gifts about the breadfruit, it's not just the gluten-free flour. See, this is the thing. Thinking about systems, in our indigenous way, we think in systems thinking. Indigenous people are just natural-born systems thinkers, right? Or naturally trained system thinkers. So the male flour of the breadfruit has been under research for the last 3 years through our Breadfruit Institute and through DOD, our program. Turns out it is a better insect repellent than DEET, 4 times more powerful. This is the flour, that little stamen that comes off there. In Polynesia, we used to just burn that like a mosquito punk, and that's why we never got bit by mosquitoes. And in fact, in Hawaii, we didn't have mosquitoes till Cook showed up. So one of our Tahitian cousins had to teach us this, because we were like, what the, where did that come from? And we learned how to do this way. But here's the kicker. Breadfruit, so that's 2 products already. Here's the 3rd one. The sap from the breadfruit tree is organic latex. That means we can make organic plastic. That means we can make a polymer that breaks down organically. You heard me earlier this morning. I work with the United Nations Marine Debris effort. Plastic is one of the great threats to the food chain in the ocean. We cannot deny that because of pandemics, we must have single-use plastic, especially in the medical field. But we might be able to develop plastic that organically breaks down as opposed to plastic that exists forever. So right now, it's going for, that is wrong. It's $1,024 a gallon. That's economic development, right? And we're studying the sap right now to see if we can get it to run like maple syrup. Hello. So I think, and these are all the agencies that are in partnership with us. Olohana Foundation, that's my little nonprofit. We're the guys that brought everybody together. Agroforestry Net is Craig's nonprofit, and between the 2 of us, we got all the other partners to jump in and go with us. Most of them governance groups. I'm going to tell you straight out, we're looking to increase our capacity to have public-private partnerships. If you know anybody wants to get in on this game, we're looking for partners, because we think that this is a brilliant thing, and government doesn't move fast enough. And right now, the critical situation in the globe, it's a time race. We can't be hesitating anymore. We got to find innovative solutions, and we got to charge on them. And here's my feeling. I don't care whether we ever make $1 off the gluten-free flour. I don't even care if we make anything off the defense contract. I don't even care if the latex thing pans out. What I care about is, regardless of all the other stuff, that food is going to be on the ground. The food is going to be on the ground. And what we learned in 2009 in Samoa, when the tidal wave hit, and I was down there for the recovery, is that they did better because food was on the ground. And they could get to food. They didn't wait 96 hours for FEMA to show up with packed rations. The tree might be knocked over, but that food is still there. So the young men and young women in Samoa, 2 hours after the tsunami, immediately were harvesting all the food and distributing it to all the families. That's self-reliance. That's community participation. And the how is me and Doc and Craig, and we're just kind of crazy. We publish guides, we go out, we teach, and we train as much as possible. We're training farmers from different islands. We're training government officials. We're training students. We're teaching them how to plant those trees. We're teaching them how to care for it and how to develop their business programs. We're doing their business plans for them, and we're going out and finding micro capital so that these women can actually create a livelihood for themselves, one that gets decent. We're bringing chefs in from the young culinary programs. They're working with breadfruit. Breadfruit is unbelievable. We make pizza crusts with it. It makes unbelievable French fries. It's nuts what you can do with a breadfruit. And here's me convincing old style farmers that they got to give up their monocropping. Didn't go so good. This is us teaching them how to plant the trees and get on. This is the young teams that I'm working with. This particular team is in Guam. I grab people that age. You know why? Because they're committed. Because they go. They understand what's at risk here. And it's their life we're trying to create the capacity for. And here's a bunch of our leadership guys at CL. And thanks, that's my short shift. First PowerPoint in 5 years. Okay.
So on our theme of Indigenous responses to climate change, here was something very grounded and detailed as part of our presentation here. And we are now going to ask Bob Goff, who is a very old friend and actually is one of the inspirations, the deep inspirations for our day, with Chip Cummins 12 years ago now, before our day was even started. For decades now, Bob has been working with Indigenous tribes as the Secretary of Intertribal COO, Council on Utility Policy. He recently introduced me in the last 2 years to Kalani, and we did a dialogue together on my program, Living Dialogues, on July 6th, which you can access on the archives, about Rising Voices, which is coming about now in its second year. It's taken place with the bringing together, through Bob's efforts, of Indigenous voices and Indigenous wisdom with scientists from UCAR and NCAR. It's had now its second year in Boulder. So if you go to kgnu.org/living dialogues, our dialogue on July 6th talks about that, but that's just really the latest tip of the iceberg of the many things that Bob Goff has done, including being a primary inspiration for our day. And our day, I want to say at this point, in honoring Chip and Sally, has basically been inspired by the desire to bring Indigenous wisdom into the modern world. And that was the third part of our, you might say, evolution. We talked about we are all Indigenous. We have all been born with this psychic and physical DNA that we need to reactivate, just like an adolescent needs to go back and recapitulate the wisdom of the people that have gone before and that are still with us, Father Sky and Mother Earth, in order to bring out a new sacred marriage of all the contributions from both the modern mind at its best and its humble obeisance to the wisdom of our forefathers and foremothers. So with that introduction, Bob, tell us about Rising Voices and whatever else you'd like to say that you've been involved in these last 30 years.
Ooh. Well, thank you, Duncan, and with your permission. We certainly observe that tradition for the tribes in the Northern Plains as well. Whenever you go somewhere, you ask the permission and the forgiveness of the elders in the room who you're speaking ahead of. There's people here who know much more than I do, and I don't mean to offend anyone by speaking out of turn that way, but I appreciate Duncan's introduction, because Kalani is just too hard of an act to follow immediately after. And
our time is limited now. Yeah.
But the work that I've done with Kalani and to respect Chip and Sally, 12, 13 years ago, when there's a lesson to be learned about those after conference bar conversations. You really have to be careful, because all kinds of things can happen out of that. And the 11th AREI-AREDAY is one of them, and glad to have played a little piece in connecting a couple of dots and saying, yeah, somebody ought to do that, Chip, you know. And he's done a marvelous job over the years, so my thanks. I've been on the road this entire week between Durango, actually Cortez, and down on the Ute Reservation, all the way up to the Flandreau Reservation in eastern South Dakota, and then through Rosebud and back. But as we heard this morning about treating and working with family, this kind of arrangement, I was in Durango for a wedding that took place between my family at Rosebud and my godchild and niece, Lakota, and a young Navajo man and his family coming up from the reservation. Both met at school at Fort Lewis, and a marvelous marriage. But unlike most of the Western weddings that you go to, where everyone sits in the pews in the church and you're all looking at the backs of the heads of the principal players, and that's the way it goes. This was done in a circle where both families during the ceremony were looking into the eyes of the other family, because it's not just these two people that are going to make a success in their life. They come from people, and they're going to need those people to support them. And we are now merging these families together. And when you have a ceremony where you're only, you're a witness, but you're a witness being witnessed by other witnesses, back and forth, and there's a different kind of merger that takes place. It's not just those two young people, but it's the families coming together. And that's what we're seeing in Kalani's story. We're seeing the families from the Pacific coming together as family and as relations and working together. I've been privileged over the years to be working with tribes in the Great Lakes, and since about 1986, tribes in the Northern Plains. And recently, and some of you who've been here before know, we've been, Intertribal Council on Utility Policy has been very much of a supporter and advocate for tribal wind power and ownership of the projects and that kind of economic development. And summer before last, at the Clinton Global Initiative, it was announced, I had the distinct honor of being able, Bill Clinton didn't want to have to read all of the stuff about all of this. So at the last minute, they gave me that script, and he just invited me out to then do that. So great. But we were able to introduce to the world the announcement that 6, 7, and then 8 of the tribes in South Dakota had come together to see if they could work as a single tribal utility authority and put up 1,000 megawatts of wind across their respective reservations across South Dakota. This was a plan that Pat Spears and I hatched 2001, 2002. And we engaged Chip as a photographer, videographer, when we documented that first turbine going into Rosebud way back when. So this is a partnership that goes on a long way. It's family. And right now they're looking in South Dakota, and the tribes we've turned it over to the sovereign governments, and they are working out how this might happen. And in the meantime, we're going to be working on smaller community projects, meeting community needs with community gardens, noting the food and the like. And I've had the privilege of working with some of the folks in the Pacific as well, looking at how, renewable energy installations just for the processing plants for the breadfruit can reduce the moisture content, reduce the weight, so therefore more can be shipped more economically, and run those enterprises with renewable energy technologies and the like. So there really is looking to how do we integrate traditional culture, traditional values, relationships with the technologies that make sense. And I'm delighted that Duncan brought up the rising voices. You also have to be careful when you work at places like UCAR and NCAR, and you have a little conversation in the hallway with someone. Next thing we know, we got a proposal together, there was support, and now we've had two annual meetings of Indigenous peoples, all associated with the United States. And it's like not just the American Indian tribes, but it's Alaskan Natives, Native Hawaiians, Native Samoans, and some of these other communities, Indigenous communities, even those that aren't even recognized by the federal government. There are tribes in Louisiana who live in the bayou, who've been living in the bayou since before Louisiana Purchase, since before that piece of territory came under the US flag, that when that purchase was completed, the only real estate they ever bought, the United States bought, was really in the state of Louisiana. The rest was just the French franchise rights to the entire Missouri River drainage area. So then the United States went out and did treaties with all of the tribes, one after another. The opportunity for those tribes in Louisiana, the federal government never acknowledged them, never saw them. They are still, these are the ones that are dealing with the BP pollution today, from the spills. They're dealing with sea level rise. They're dealing with the poisoning of their freshwater marshes, the salt infiltration and the like. So there's a lot of folks looking at how to do things as family, do things as community. Rising Voices is where we've brought that together. And the last piece I want to say about our working with NCAR is that it's given us an opportunity not to have climate scientists say, how can we get information to these various communities, but it's to have communities ask questions and say, we would like your science to help us with this problem or with that problem in terms of our local adaptation. And we are now looking at climate modeling for the next 30 years in the Missouri River Basin that may be able to actually tell us what production can happen at this site or that site or this other site. And that helps us with the economics. It helps us bringing these projects to fruition. So the science that has always been there and has been single-mindedly proclaiming what it needs to is giving an ear now, I think, to Indigenous communities.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you very much,
you.
Bob. And now, as time is slipping away, unfortunately, we are going to invite now, as our last speaker, we'll have the dialogue that we envisioned in the hallways tonight and for the next 3 days. I want to introduce Osprey Oriel Lake, the founder of We Can International, who is going to present information on Indigenous women that she's been working with for quite some time. Osprey.
Thank you. And I would also like to ask permission to speak. Thank you. I've worked with Indigenous people almost all my life, and I feel very honored. It's made a huge impact in my life to have that experience. And right now, I would like to also remember a lot of the women that I work with. I was asked earlier when we were all going to be sitting on this panel together, you know, oh, there's one woman, and I said, don't worry. There's a lot of grandmothers and aunties and sisters who sit here with me, so they're here as well. And I think one of the things that really impacted me early on is I worked with an Indigenous grandmother who told me when I was in my late teens, early 20s, a lot of stories. And one thing she said from her people is that that was carried on traditionally is the sense of what happened with Indigenous people on the land here when everyone came over from Europe and the colonization of Turtle Island. And in a very gracious way, she said what her elders told her is, our little brother, our little sisters here, we've prophesized this time. And, you know, and it was not said in a judgmental way, but they're mentally ill. They're mentally ill. They're completely out of balance with Mother Earth. And there's going to be huge problems, but this healing has to happen. They're disconnected from the land. They're disconnected from their mother. And we know this. We know we carry this historical trauma with us of this disconnect from being connected to Mother Earth, Mother Nature. And that there would be a time, the prophecy said, and of course in many different tribes it's said in different ways, this was just the story that was shared with me, that the people from the east and the west and the north and the south would all come together and there would be a new time. But it wouldn't just happen. It would be because we all worked to make it happen. And I think that's the journey that we're in right now. So with the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, which Sally, Rani, and I are co-founders of, we're working with Indigenous women in many different ways, and there's two that I want to share with you this evening. And I think a big part of our work rests on uplifting the voice of Indigenous women. I think Indigenous women, with all the women leaders we work with, have some of those potent and important voices and power that we could ever hope to imagine as we reimagine our world and this new time. And the two areas I want to mention tonight are we work with women on the front lines of very, very harsh situations with extractive industries in their communities, and we work to lift up their voices and help them do what they know they need to do and really lead from behind, as was talked about earlier today. A lot of these women are in very strong resistance movements, and they need a lot of support. The other area that we work in is with the traditional ecological knowledge, which has been discussed here, and really understanding how vital that is, and a key component to climate change solutions, as well as the cultural wisdom coming from Indigenous people. And I wanted to show you a few quick slides. Oops, that went too fast. Okay. This is from women that we're working with in the Amazon forest. Very powerful people. We don't have time to go into it in great detail, but there was an incredible march that was held by Indigenous women in Ecuador, marching from Puyo to Quito in October last year to go tell the government that they did not want the oil auctions to go off on their land. And there's so much serious damage going on in the Amazon, some of the most biodiverse places on the planet. And the women are standing strong, and they have protected their land from many, many, many attempts to have oil extraction and oil companies on their lands. And they've been very successful, and they've also lost. But we're really there to support them, and they are some of the most fierce, brilliant, and strong women that I know. I was with them in Ecuador earlier this year and having different meetings about our strategies going forward. One of the women, I'll just tell a brief story, we got into a conversation about what is wealth, because in addition to sort of on-the-ground strategies around how we're going to amplify their voices, do more media so we can see what these women need and how it's important that they are understood as caretakers and natural custodians of these lands, and why they've been kept biodiverse because of the fact that these women and their tribes are there. We got into a conversation about wealth and a cultural exchange around some of the problems coming from the global north and different viewpoints and cosmologies coming from the global south. And this one woman told us how they have 14 different types of corn in her community. And she brought corn with us. And I love always being with Indigenous people because it wasn't intellectual. I mean, we're eating her roasted corn while we're talking about the corn. And she said, you know, I had the opportunity to come speak in the United States about our people and our lands and our struggles and our resistance movements. And it shocked me because everywhere I went, there was only one kind of corn. I'm wealthy. You are not wealthy. We have corn for our children. We have corn for ceremony. We have corn for this time of year. We have songs for our corn. You are poor. Another group of Indigenous women we work with is up in Alberta, Canada, where the tar sands are. And I don't think I need to explain, this is a before and after shot. And very devastating to see what's happening there. And it was, you know, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the extraction of the bitumen tar sands oil. And just, you know, as many people are referring to it, it's called Morador. You know, it's just an awful, awful extraction that is going there, and the devastation to the local communities there, and what's happening to their forests and their water and the cancer rates. It's very, very difficult. These are some of the women that we work with, and very, very courageous women. And they were, some of them came to the climate rally that was held last year in Washington, D.C. And we're bringing these women again to the big climate march that some of you might know is happening in September, just a month from now, in New York, because the Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has called a special climate leadership meeting. And there's going to be huge mobilization and meetings going on, and we want to make sure that Indigenous women are well represented and can tell their own stories there. I'll just give one quote from one of our colleagues, Ariel Derringer of the Athabasca Chippewa First Nations in Alberta, Canada, where the tar sands are. And she was speaking about the impacts of tar sands extraction in her community. And she makes a really important point. I'll just let her say it in her own words. Our people and our Mother Earth can no longer afford to be economic hostages in the race to industrialize our homelands. It's time for our people to rise up and take back the role as caretakers and stewards of the land. And I just found that so profound. They can't afford to be economic hostages in the race to industrialize their lands. I think that's something for all of us to really think about. We're also working in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's huge rainforests there that mostly people don't know about. About 60% of all the rainforests in Africa are in Congo. And again, the protection of forests is one of our key ways of working with Indigenous peoples, and especially the women who protect those lands and have learned to live with them in a good way. So the second area we work in is around traditional ecological knowledge. And one of the things I love about this type of knowledge, it has such beautiful spiritual and ecological balance within it, and really demonstrates a different way that we can live with Mother Earth and with each other. And I think it's really essential to understand that Indigenous people maintain 80% of the planet's biodiversity in or near to 85% of the world's protected areas. I think that's something we really need to understand. It's interesting that the worldviews, way of life of Indigenous people is a reflection directly of the biodiversity that's left on the Earth. I think that we shouldn't overlook that. And in terms of climate, since this panel is really designed to also specifically talk about climate, more and more scientists are realizing the relationship they need to have with Indigenous peoples around understanding what's happening with the waterways, what's happening with the land, all these different things that Indigenous people know because they're living close to the land, as has been discussed. And recently, the IPCC assessment report has noted, and this is a quote from them, an invaluable basis for developing adaptation and natural resource management strategies in response to environmental and other forms of change is from Indigenous knowledge. And I think that that's really important that the scientific community is finally beginning to recognize this as equal knowledge. Just two more quick points, and then I'll be done, is the other thing that I think is really important that we found in a lot of our dialogues with Indigenous people is also around the cultural knowledge. As an example, I've heard story after story, and I'm sure my elders here would have a lot to say about this, is in so many different Indigenous lands, there's certain places you don't go. They're sacred places. And it's not what we would consider because of mythology and ancient tradition, but it's also ecological knowledge that certain areas like headwaters, you don't go there. You leave them to be preserved. You leave them there for the spirits. You leave them there in a sacred and holy way, but it's also because it makes ecological sense to the ecosystem. And there's many, many stories that help people live in a good way with the land that I think we need to really understand are incredibly wise, knowledgeable concepts that we can learn from. The other point I want to make in closing is something that I learned from Indigenous peoples of the Andes and from a lot of our allies who are involved in social movements from the Global South. And it's this concept called sumac causai, and that's a Quechua word. And in Spanish, it's buen vivir. It's an idea of really moving now through social movements in the environmental movement in the US, just the beginning stages, but it's big in the Global South. And it means, in loose translation, living well. And it's not about just being comfortable, it's about these deep concepts of how we can approach sustainability, how we can approach development in a different way. And I'll just suggest its meaning so we have understanding of it from discussions with Indigenous people and different scholars. It means sumac causai is living in ecological and economical balance, harmony in all relationships, personal and collective growth appropriate to our local conditions, in good health, and living well in community, including the community of nature. And it's such a full understanding, a cosmology, and a worldview that I think we need to really understand in our modern society. And it's also what I think is powerful. It's a whole different way of understanding what is development and also how we can deal with our current extractive economy. Because one of the biggest problems we're having is our economy is based upon extractive industries, which are no longer sustainable. So how do we move into this understanding and worldview of sumac causai is something that I'd really like to bring into our space here at the conference, this very many-layered idea of how we live well with each other and Mother Earth. So I leave now the conversation back to you, and just to honor a lot of the grandmothers that I've worked with and to bring their presence into the room with us. Thank you.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, in this great human developmental cycle that we're all in, one of the things that we all are recognizing and have for many years, most of us in this room, and the society in general is the great need for the feminine to come back in balance in our minds, in our hearts, and in our ways of life. And so before we conclude, Osprey, I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about We Can International and how people can connect with you and your work. And it's just thrilling to hear that you're going to be able to bring the voices of these Indigenous women to the march in September and to all the other places that they're now being heard in. So tell us how people can connect with you and We Can International.
Sure, and just to know, we are going to have a panel in a few days, a women's leadership panel, and so we'll be discussing more about that and other women's work as well. It's the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, wecaninternational.org, and that's our website. And there you can learn about all the various work that we're doing. And we also have a declaration that was written during a conference that we had last year, where there's a lot of Indigenous women, a lot of grassroots women, a lot of high-level women leaders, Christiana Figueres from the UN. We had former President Mary Robinson there, Sylvia Earle, who spoke beautifully earlier today. A lot of incredible women were there, Dr. Jane Goodall, and together we collectively wrote a document called the Women's Climate Declaration. And it's a very powerful statement talking about a lot of the concepts that are here in this conference and Indigenous people's knowledge, and it's in the hallway, right where registration desk is, and we would really invite all of you to come sign it. And those signatures are going to be brought to the delegates who attend the UN Climate Summit in New York. So our voices can be heard and we can all be represented there, and men and women both. We welcome you to sign it. Ted Turner has signed it. The former president of the Maldives has signed it. And so it's circulating all over the world, and we'd really love you to participate in that way. And I think I'll leave a lot of more comments about We Can till we have our panel on the women. But we really encourage all of you to participate in women's leadership and supporting and empowering women, because we know this is a time, I don't care what culture you're from or background, I hear over and over again, people know this is a time for women to be lifted up and our voices heard all over the world. And so we invite men and women together to work with us on this vision.
Hear, hear. Whoa.
Thank you.
Men and women together, and the modern mind and the Indigenous mind, enlivened by the Indigenous mind. I'd like to give the final comment then. Roland, to you. We began with you, and having heard what you've heard, would you like to make some final remarks?
Well, thank you. I think we're all of the same mind. I think we're all trying to do and say the same thing, except that we're saying it in a different way. We all have concepts, we all have perspectives, and my perspective as a native to this land, as well as what you are, but I go a little bit deeper because my family was intensely involved with nature and Mother Nature, because that's just our nature, I suppose. But my perspective is a little different than yours. Native Americans are a little different. I like to illustrate it this way. If you have a white man walking on one side of the river, and you have an Indian on the other side walking, and the white man will look up at the Indian and say, "Hey, Indian, show me how to get across the river." And the Indian will look back at him and say, "You know what? You're already across the river." It's just different perspectives, you see. But we're all saying the same thing. And if we pull together, get our ideas together, we can endeavor. Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Roland. And in conclusion then, I'll just leap to David Bohm, our quantum physicist, who wrote a book actually at one point on dialogue, in which he described it as we are all at one and the same time both particles and waves. And when we meet like this, we are on different sides of a river, but if we each hold our own bank, then the dia, or the flow of logos, of the wisdom of the universe, which is the all-encompassing, unifying perspective, will actually arise and reveal itself to us as it has tonight. And I want to thank not only all of our speakers who vocalized what they've vocalized, but this deep listening audience that evoked what we've all shared here tonight. And I feel a deep sense of honor and unity in this room, to be here and to be here together, and to think that we have 3 more days to actually take this spirit forward in personal conversations and in panels together. I want to thank Chip and Sally for bringing this together, and the whole team here at AREI-AREDAY. It's a magnificent experience, and there'll be many more to come. So thank you all very much.